Marisol, why are you eating alone at this hour?
I didn't think anyone would see.
Eleanor Hartwell had lived in her Charleston mansion for 31 years, and in all that time, she believed she knew every sound the old house made: the creak of the third stair, the hum of the kitchen refrigerator at midnight, the wind moving through the magnolia trees outside her bedroom window. She had raised her children within these walls, buried her husband from this house 3 years ago, and grown old inside its quiet, familiar rhythm. But she had never once noticed the sound of a spoon tapping softly against a bowl at 2 in the morning. It was insomnia that led her downstairs that night. Grief still visited her in waves, even after all this time, arriving without warning in the middle of ordinary evenings. Sleep had become a stranger to her more nights than not. She padded down the cold marble staircase in her robe, intending only to warm a cup of tea and sit a while in the silence she had grown used to. Instead, she found Marisol. Marisol Reyes had worked as the Hartwell family's housekeeper for nearly 2 years. She was quiet, meticulous, always the first to rise in the morning and, Eleanor had assumed, the first to retire to bed at night. She was polite at dinner, efficient with the household chores, and careful never to draw attention to herself. Eleanor had simply believed this was her nature, a private woman who preferred an early night. She had never once considered that Marisol might not be sleeping at all. The younger woman sat hunched at the small staff table near the pantry, eating cold rice from a chipped bowl, eating quickly, glancing toward the hallway every few seconds like she was doing something forbidden. When she saw Eleanor standing there, she nearly dropped the bowl from her hands. "Mrs. Hartwell, I'm sorry. I didn't think anyone would be awake." Marisol. Eleanor's voice was gentle, but laced with concern. "Why are you eating now? It's 2 in the morning. There is a full kitchen here, a full pantry. Why are you sitting alone with cold rice in the dark?" Marisol's hands trembled around the bowl. For a long moment, she said nothing at all. "I'm not hiding, I like the quiet." It was a lie, and Eleanor had lived long enough, buried enough people she loved, weathered enough hardship of her own, to recognize the particular silence of someone protecting a secret they were terrified to speak aloud. She let it go that night. But she did not forget it. Over the following week, Eleanor began paying closer attention, not out of suspicion toward Marisol, but out of a growing, uneasy feeling that something in her own household had been happening right under her roof, and she had simply never looked closely enough to notice. She noticed that Marisol never ate at the family table, even when Eleanor herself invited her. She noticed her portions at dinner always seemed strangely small compared to everyone else's. She noticed that Marisol only finished her final chores and sat down to eat after Eleanor's son, Julian, had gone up to his room for the night never before. Julian had moved back into the mansion 8 months earlier, shortly after his father's passing, saying he wanted to help manage the estate and be closer to his mother during a difficult time. Eleanor had been grateful, even relieved, to have him nearby. She trusted him completely, without question, the way only a mother can. It was that very trust that had kept her from asking the harder questions sooner. One evening, Eleanor came downstairs earlier than usual, planning to check on dinner preparations herself. She overheard voices in the kitchen before she reached the doorway, Julian's voice, low and sharp, and Marisol's, quiet and pleading beneath it. "I already gave you this month's pay," Marisol was saying, her voice tight with restrained fear. "I need it for my daughter's school fees. Please, Mr. Hartwell." "You'll get it back eventually," Julian snapped. "I told you already, it's a loan. Family helps family, doesn't it? You live here rent-free. You eat here for free, don't you?" "I don't really eat here," Marisol said quietly. "Not anymore." Eleanor stood frozen just outside the doorway, one hand pressed flat against the cold wall, her heart pounding in her chest. The next morning, Eleanor did something she had never done in 31 years of living in that house. She sat down and reviewed the household's financial records herself, instead of leaving the task to Julian as she had every single month since her husband's death. What she found kept her seated at her late husband's old mahogany desk for over an hour, unable to move. For 8 months, Julian had been quietly withholding portions of Marisol's wages, calling them loans against expenses she had never agreed to and could not afford to dispute. He had also instructed the kitchen staff to give Marisol smaller portions at mealtimes, claiming she was on a special diet, when in truth he had simply decided she did not deserve full meals unless she had, in his words, earned them through extra unpaid work. Worse still, he had quietly told 2 other members of staff that Marisol could not be trusted around the household's more expensive items, a cruel and baseless lie that had left her isolated, quietly watched, and humiliated in the very house she worked nearly 80 hours a week to keep spotless. Eleanor thought, with a wave of shame, of every night she had gone to bed warm, comfortable, and full while a woman under her own roof had gone hungry 2 floors below her, too frightened to say a single word. That night, Eleanor asked Marisol to sit with her not at the small staff table, but at the real dining table, with the good chairs and the good light. "Why didn't you tell me?" Eleanor asked softly, her voice breaking slightly. Marisol's eyes filled with tears she had clearly been holding back for months, maybe longer. "Because he is your son. Because I need this job to send money home to my daughter. Because whoever believes the housekeeper over the man who owns the house." Eleanor reached across the table and took her hand firmly in both of hers. "I do," she said. "I believe you. And I am so deeply sorry it took me this long to see what was happening in my own home." Julian was confronted the following morning, in front of the family's longtime attorney. The withheld wages, nearly $11,000 in total, were returned to Marisol in full, along with a formal written apology and a raise that finally reflected the years of dedicated work she had given this family. Julian moved out of the mansion within the month, and their relationship remained strained for a long time afterward. Marisol still works for Eleanor today, but now she eats dinner at the family table every single night, at a normal hour, no cold rice eaten in secret, no hiding, no watching the hallway in fear. Eleanor learned something that night she still carries with her, something she now repeats to anyone who will listen. Sometimes the people closest to us hide their pain not because they do not trust us, but because they have learned, painfully, that silence feels safer than the risk of speaking and not being believed. If someone in your life eats alone, leaves a room too early, flinches at raised voices, or quietly disappears the moment someone else enters, do not assume it is simply their nature. Sometimes they are only waiting for someone patient enough and brave enough to finally sit down and ask them why. When kindness finally arrives for someone who has been quietly surviving in silence, it does not just feed them. It reminds them that they were worth noticing all along.